Yes or no? Would you say New York City is susceptible to these kinds of security threats?
Yes, and that's why they should spend.
So with New York City being the number one terrorist target in the nation,
the federal government gave them
with New York City being the number one, I reclaim my time, with New York City being the number one security threat in this nation, it's unconscionable that you would cut $134 million in urban area security initiative funding for the city of New York. What compels you to knowingly make our cities less safe with these funding cuts?
What compels you, your mayor, and your governor to release thousands of criminals on the streets rather than to turn them over to ICE? You'd rather release a murderer out on the street.
You cut $134 million in funds to support the security of New York City and the state of New York, the number one threat in this nation. In your own words, your cuts are blatantly political, callous, and outright dangerous. It's clear you have no interest in countering real threats in the homeland. While high-risk cities and disaster zones wait for help, you've devoted the past 11 months of violent raids, anti-police policies, and nonstop photo ops.
This is Congressman Tim Kennedy accusing DHS Secretary Kristi Noem of failure, negligence, and political retaliation, and backing it up with deaths, dollar amounts, and receipts.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Secretary Noem, with about a year as DHS Secretary under your belt, there's no shortage of criticisms for me to choose from today. You've deported American citizens, bringing a level of inhumanity to this nation's immigration laws that I haven't seen in my lifetime. You've terrorized communities, including my own in Buffalo, New York, vowing to go after the worst of the worst, but instead detaining women, children, and hardworking individuals in pursuit of the American dream. You've botched a response to one of the most devastating floods we've seen, an extreme weather event along the Guadalupe River that took more than 130 innocent lives, including more than 35 children. Central Texas waited days for your agency to respond because of the reckless policies you've implemented. Your FEMA lead was missing in action, completely unreachable, as were FEMA's call lines, with 84% of calls unanswered on July 7th. 3 days after the floods. FEMA personnel, despite your slashing of their ranks, who were ready and willing to help, waited days to spring into action because of your policies. Disasters do not wait for bureaucracy. Your abysmal performance goes beyond your woeful disaster response. You've also taken a sledgehammer to FEMA's recovery, preparedness, and mitigation missions. You canceled more than $4 billion in building resilient infrastructure in communities funds, a program that helps communities reduce their risk of natural disasters. You withheld millions in FEMA funds for emergency alerting infrastructure found to be in violation of the Impound Control Act. You, perhaps most critical to my state of New York, canceled more than 90% of New York State's Homeland Security Program funding, including $134 million in urban area security initiative funds for New York City's greater metropolitan areas. You have mismanaged these grants to the point where cities and states, including New York, are suing you to recover counterterrorism funding that's lawfully theirs and that Congress intended for them to receive. It's a tragedy that we're here today discussing these cuts to counterterrorism and security grant funds for a city that was the main site of the September 11th attacks, the entire reason your department was established in the first place. As the ranking member of the Subcommittee on Emergency Management, it's my responsibility to show the American public how you've systemically upended FEMA and emergency preparedness as we know it. So I have a couple of questions. Simple yes or no answer will suffice. Would you agree with the national security officials' assessment that the United States has been operating in a heightened threat environment for several years now?
Yes.
Yes or no? Would you say New York City is susceptible to these kinds of security threats?
Yes, and that's why they should spend.
So with New York City being the number one terrorist target in the nation,
the federal government gave them
with New York City being the number one, I reclaim my time, with New York City being the number one security threat in this nation, it's unconscionable that you would cut $134 million in urban area security initiative funding for the city of New York. What compels you to knowingly make our cities less safe with these funding cuts?
What compels you, your mayor, and your governor to release thousands of criminals on the streets rather than to turn them over to ICE. You'd rather release
Secretary Noem,
a murderer out onto
Secretary
your
Noem,
street,
you cut
a rapist on your
$134
street,
million
and honor our
in
detainers. You should
funds
honor our
to
detainers
support the
against violent
security
criminals
of
to get
New
them out
York
of New York
City
City.
and the state of New York, the #1 threat in this nation. In your own words, your cuts are blatantly political, callous, and outright dangerous. It's clear you have no interest in countering real threats in the homeland. While high-risk cities and disaster zones wait for help, you've devoted the past 11 months of violent raids, anti-police policies, and nonstop photo ops. You've brought shame to a department that was created after 9/11 in a time of unity to protect our people. Your failure to lead is a direct threat to the homeland security in our nation, and you should resign immediately. I yield back.
Representative Tim Kennedy of New York did not just criticize Secretary Kristi Noem, he laid out a connected story about immigration enforcement, disaster response, and counterterrorism funding that helps explain what is at stake for communities nationwide. If you want clear reporting that connects the dots and enables you to understand how these decisions affect real lives, make sure you subscribe. Kennedy began by framing the moment as one of cumulative failure, not a single policy disagreement. He argued the deportations carried out under the department's watch have crossed a moral line, including cases involving American citizens, and that communities like Buffalo have experienced enforcement that feels less like targeted security and more like fear-driven disruption. His point was not simply about immigration, it was about trust. Homeland security depends on cooperation between communities and government, and once that trust erodes, even legitimate enforcement becomes harder and less effective. If this kind of context-driven coverage is useful to you, subscribe so you do not miss what comes next. From there, Kennedy shifted to disaster response, drawing attention to the deadly flooding along the Guadalupe River in Texas. More than 130 people were killed, including dozens of children, and Kennedy described a federal response slowed by internal policy changes and staffing cuts. FEMA call lines went largely unanswered, trained personnel were sidelined, and local officials waited days for help. The lesson here is structural. Disasters do not pause for administrative bottlenecks. When preparedness and rapid response capacity are weakened, the cost is measured in lives, not spreadsheets. For reporting that explains how government structure affects emergency response on the ground, subscribe to stay informed. The sharpest turn in the exchange came when Kennedy tied FEMA cuts directly to national security. He outlined billions of dollars canceled from programs designed to harden infrastructure against future disasters, along with the withholding of funds Congress had already approved. Then he brought it home to New York. More than 90% of the state's Homeland Security Program funding was cut, including $134 million from the Urban Area Security Initiative that supports counterterrorism efforts in high-risk cities like New York City. That funding exists because New York remains a top symbolic and strategic target, a reality shaped by the legacy of September 11th. If you want reporting that connects past lessons to present policy choices, make sure you subscribe. When Kennedy asked Secretary Noem simple yes or no questions about the heightened threat environment and New York City's vulnerability, the exchange revealed a deeper conflict. The department argues that state and local governments should shoulder more responsibility, especially when they do not cooperate with federal immigration enforcement. Kennedy responded that counterterrorism funding is not a bargaining chip. From his perspective, tying public safety resources to immigration compliance risks makes major cities less safe, regardless of where you stand politically. Understanding that tension is key to understanding today's Homeland Security debate, and subscribing helps you keep up with it. What made this moment resonate was not just the volume of accusations, but the through line connecting them. Kennedy portrayed a department he believes has shifted away from preparedness, mitigation, and cooperative security toward enforcement-heavy optics and political signaling. Whether viewers agree or disagree, the exchange raises a critical question. How do we balance border enforcement, disaster readiness, and counterterrorism in an era of constant risk? That is a question every American has a stake in, and if you want continued, clear, human-centered explanations of these debates, subscribe and stay with us.